Literature teacher Samantha Gray never imagined that a simple break between classes could turn into a nightmare. Larkwood High School was known for its history of good discipline and high academic standards. For Samantha, working there was a privilege. She always felt fulfilled, surrounded by dedicated students and attentive colleagues. But on that day, something felt different, like an invisible shadow looming over the routine that, until then, had seemed so normal. The rain pounded against the corridor windows, creating a monotonous, constant sound that intensified the feeling of claustrophobia. The droplets ran down the glass like small streams of water, interrupting the usual silence of the building. The gray sky outside mirrored the stuffy atmosphere inside the school. It was a cold, damp day, and the corridor was deserted except for the sound of her own footsteps echoing. Walking slowly, Samantha made her way to the women's restroom at the end of the hall, a simple space that always caused her a slight sense of unease. The bathroom was not large, but it had a somewhat peculiar layout. The white tile walls were worn with age, and the fluorescent lights in the ceiling, though still functional, emitted a cold and uncomfortable glow. The air smelled a bit stale, a mix of cleaning products and a faint hint of dampness. It was the kind of place where echoes seemed to drag on, as if the very structure of the building was trying to conceal something. The feeling that the bathroom held secrets had always been there, but Samantha had never given it much thought. After all, she was a rational woman, used to dealing with the everyday challenges of life. She entered, let out a deep sigh, and placed her bag on the sink counter. She closed her eyes for a moment, enjoying the few minutes of silence she had left. Her thoughts were in turmoil. The past few weeks had been intense. Exams, grading, meetings, and her 10th grade students were more restless than ever. Among teenagers, there was always an energy that was hard to control, and today they seemed especially agitated. Samantha just wanted a little peace, a pause before facing another round of classes. She approached the sink and looked into the mirror, trying to breathe more deeply to relax. But as she observed herself there, her reflection didn't seem as clear as usual. For a moment, her face appeared distorted, blurred. She frowned and blinked several times, trying to shake off the strange feeling. "You're just tired," she thought to herself, closing her eyes once more. But when she opened her eyes, the discomfort was even more intense. Her reflection wasn't there. Or rather, it wasn't complete. There was only a hazy mist where her image should have been. Samantha's heart skipped a beat, and she quickly stepped away from the mirror. "This can't be." She blinked, and the mist dissipated, but something felt different. The air around her seemed thicker, harder to breathe. She tried to focus on the mirror again, but the vision now appeared blurry, distorted. With a sigh, she pushed these thoughts from her mind. "I'm just tired, that's all," she repeated to herself. Then she turned the doorknob and tried to leave. However, the cold metal of the handle seemed to resist. She pulled harder, but the door wouldn't budge. Puzzled, she tried pushing it, attempting to open it with more force. Nothing. The door was locked. "This is impossible," Samantha thought, her mind starting to race. There was no reason for the door to be locked. She stepped back and looked around, searching for any sign that could explain what was happening. The bathroom was empty, silent, with no indication that anyone had been there before her. No one. Only the muffled sound of the rain outside and the flickering fluorescent lights, now buzzing slightly, creating shadows that dragged across the walls. She approached the door again, trying to pull it harder, but the handle resisted. Panic began to set in. It was as if the very space were against her, as if reality were warping, twisting around her hands, which were now beginning to sweat. For a brief moment, she felt fragile, vulnerable. She looked around once more, and her eyes fell on the mirror. The reflection was once again cloudy, like a dense fog that seemed to move, breathing with her. A cold shiver ran down her spine. She tried to concentrate, but what she saw in the mirror wasn't a normal reflection. It was as if she were looking at something more. Something that wasn't her, but at the same time was there. The fog, thick and dark, seemed to take the form of something. Someone. The sound of the rain outside was muffled. The atmosphere seemed to have grown heavier, and Samantha felt as though she were being watched, as if something was staring at her from the other side of the mirror. The sensation was oppressive, overwhelming. "I need to get out of here," she thought, but she couldn't move. Then she heard it. A low whisper, almost inaudible, coming from the mirror. "You are lost." Samantha's heart stopped for a moment. The reflection in the mirror seemed clearer, but in a way that made no sense. It was as if she were distorting, as if she were being pulled into that void. She took a step back, but the sensation that something was drawing nearer to her, silently, was inescapable. Panic set in all at once. And for the first time, she understood that something was terribly wrong with that place. Something she couldn't comprehend. Time seemed to drag. With each passing minute, Samantha's anxiety grew. She tried to use her phone, but there was no signal. What had started as a simple inconvenience was now transforming into a prison. The clock on the wall read 3:47 p.m., but the distorted sense of time left Samantha's mind confused. She knew she had been there for far more than 10 minutes, but the clock showed no difference. She felt a dizziness, a sensation that the place was growing or that she was shrinking. The walls seemed to compress the air, and the bathroom, which had once been just ordinary, now seemed to have a life of its own. She turned toward the only point of escape, the window, but it was locked, as if the entire school had been shut off from her, isolated. Her heart rate increased, fear turning into panic. "You can't leave," the voice whispered again. She looked around, but the bathroom was empty. Nothing seemed out of place except for the overwhelming feeling that she was not alone. Fear began to erode her rationality. Samantha's normally logical mind began to unravel. She felt the eyes of something invisible watching her every move. The lights flickered more frequently now, making the environment darker and more surreal. The voice, which had seemed distant at first, began to grow clearer, more demanding. "You'll never leave here. The bathroom is your new home. The prison is your reality." Samantha tried to scream, but her voice seemed swallowed by the dampness of the bathroom. She moved toward the walls, searching for some hidden escape, but every touch seemed to make the place feel even more oppressive. The air was heavy, charged with an energy she couldn't comprehend. A low sound echoed as if someone were knocking on the doors of the stalls, but when she checked, they were all empty. She was alone, or so it seemed. Then she saw the reflection. In the mirror, a figure appeared. It wasn't her reflection, but the silhouette of a woman, with hair falling over her shoulders and dark, hollow eyes. The figure smiled, but it wasn't a normal smile. It was an empty smile, a smile that showed deep knowledge, a possession. What Samantha didn't know, and what the mirror wanted to show her, was that the bathroom had been built on the grounds of an old school, where many years before a teacher had disappeared, the victim of a tragic accident. Since then, the energy of the school seemed to have become distorted, cursed. The lost teacher had never left that place. She had been swallowed by the school itself, transformed into a spirit, and now she wanted a new soul to replace hers. The tension was unbearable. Samantha felt a wave of terror, something far beyond fear. It wasn't just the fear of being trapped. It was the fear that maybe, just maybe, she was already lost. Forever. Samantha was gasping, trying to process what she saw. The mirror was no longer just a reflection. The figure that had appeared before her was starting to become more defined, its contours sharper, as if it were emerging from the surface of the glass. The woman's smile in the mirror widened, growing more grotesque, and her black eyes, like bottomless pits, seemed to suck the light around them. "You're not the first," the voice, now echoing in her mind, murmured. "And you won't be the last." Samantha recoiled, but her legs were weak, her body strange, almost paralyzed. Fear consumed her, but a morbid curiosity also took hold of her mind. The woman in the mirror was not just any figure. The shadow she cast did not belong to the present, but to a distant past, a time before the school had been built. A teacher like her. A teacher who had vanished under mysterious circumstances, a soul trapped in limbo. The woman in the mirror was not just a memory, she was a warning. "You're seeing what I see," the voice continued. "You feel what I felt. The anguish, the loneliness, the loss. Now you are one of us." Samantha looked around, trying to find a way to escape. But the walls, which had once seemed solid and impenetrable, began to pulse, as if they had a life of their own. The environment seemed to distort around her, the shadows stretching, the bathroom stalls becoming darker, more oppressive. The air, once stifling, grew even denser, as if the school itself were breathing and she was inside it. She moved closer to the mirror, unable to control herself. The reflection of the woman began to merge with her own, the lines between them dissolving. Her hands trembled as she touched the cold, misty surface. Then something strange happened. Her hand passed through the mirror. She pulled her hand back, startled. What do you want from me?" Samantha screamed, her voice trembling. The woman in the mirror smiled, but now the smile was different. It was an expression of understanding. "What you fear is not what you see. What you fear is what you will become. You will be like us, a faceless shadow, a lost soul. The choice is yours, Samantha." Samantha felt the pressure on her shoulders. Time stretched, seemed to dissolve into a thick fog. She was running out of choices, out of air, as if reality itself was slipping through her fingers. The idea of becoming part of this place, of disappearing like the teacher who had been watching her, consumed her from the inside. She looked again at the mirror. The reflected figure became clearer, more detailed. She could now see the details of her own eyes, her features distorted, as if she were starting to lose her own identity. "You are no longer who you were," said the woman in the mirror, her voice now laced with bitter irony. "But you can become something more, something eternal." Samantha felt a sharp pain in her head, like a blade piercing her thoughts. She looked at the walls, desperate, trying to find something, anything that would make her leave. It was then that she heard a sound, a low, distant noise, as if someone was calling her name. She turned abruptly, but there was no one. The door was there, but it was different. Somehow it seemed further away, as if the space around it was expanding, making the door appear smaller, more unrecognizable. The woman in the mirror began to laugh. The sound was strangely familiar, as if echoing from Samantha's own mind. "You can't escape, Samantha. The school is already inside you." The next morning, the sun was still low when the students of Larkwood High arrived for the first day of school that week. They walked down the usual hallway, laughing and chatting, as if time were following its normal course. But there was something different. Something in the air, an almost tangible tension, a sense that something wasn't right. When the classes began, Samantha's absence was noticed. Her students, so accustomed to her calm and controlled presence, found it odd that she hadn't arrived. They thought maybe she was just running late. But hours passed and nothing. No messages. No explanation. Principal Mr. Miller went to the teacher's lounge to check on what had happened, but found her classroom door locked. Inside, the room was strangely silent. He tried calling Samantha's phone, but the call went straight to voicemail. No luck. Principal Mrs. Williams was called, and after a brief conversation with the security guard, who reported that no suspicious activity had been noticed, they decided to check one of the more distant areas of the building, the bathrooms, since Samantha had been seen there last. They arrived at the girls' bathroom at the end of the hallway. The door was locked, but the key had mysteriously disappeared. After several minutes of trying to force the door open, it finally gave way. The bathroom was empty. There were no signs of a struggle, no signs of Samantha. However, in the mirror, something was written, as if an invisible hand had left a message with steam. "There is no escape for those who are already part of the place." The principal, feeling a chill run down her spine, quickly stepped back. Something was wrong with that place. Something she couldn't understand. The students and staff at Larkwood High never knew what really happened to Samantha, but a persistent feeling lingered in the air throughout that school year. Something dark, a veiled presence that stretched down the school hallway, particularly around the girls' bathroom. And on rainy nights, if you paid close attention, you could hear, amidst the sound of rain tapping against the windows, a soft voice, almost a whisper, coming from somewhere in the school. "You are lost, like me." And no one ever knew for sure whether it was the echo of a past that would never fade, or if the school itself was somehow alive, and now one more soul had been lost within it.